Hey night traveler, welcome to the Stealth Podcast. Here, you'll hear chilling stories to help you drift off or keep you awake. If you're into that vibe, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, kill the lights, put your headphones on, and let's hit the road. My name is Garrett Callahan. I'm 42 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas. My girlfriend Nina is 38, works as a freelance photographer, and honestly, she's the one who convinced me to buy the van in the first place. We've been talking about doing this van life thing for 2 years, watching all those YouTube couples living their best lives on the road, and finally last March we pulled the trigger on a 2018 Ram ProMaster. Spent 3 months converting it, built the bed platform myself, installed solar panels, even put in a little kitchenette. Nina decorated it with these fairy lights and tapestries that made it feel less like a cargo van and more like a tiny home. Her best friend Rachel thought we were crazy, kept saying we'd get tired of it after a month. But here we were 6 months in and still going strong. The drive down to Tulum was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. We'd done Colorado, Utah, even made it up to Montana, but Mexico was different. It felt more real, more raw, you know? We crossed the border at Brownsville, took our time driving through Veracruz and Campeche, stopping at these little beach towns that didn't even show up on Google Maps. Nina was in heaven, taking photos of everything: street vendors, colonial churches, stray dogs sleeping in the shade. But the closer we got to Tulum, the more I started noticing things that felt off. Like, we'd stop for gas, and these guys would just stare at our van, whispering to each other. At first I thought maybe it was just because we were obviously American tourists, but there was something about the way they looked at us that made my skin crawl. This scary, calculating look, like they were sizing us up. We rolled into Tulum on a Thursday afternoon, and man, the place was packed. Not with locals, but with influencers and trust fund kids staying in those expensive eco-lodges that cost $400 a night. We weren't about that life. We wanted the real experience, away from the tourist traps. So instead of parking at one of those designated van spots near the beach where everyone congregates, I drove us about 20 minutes outside of town to this secluded area I'd found on iOverlander. The reviews were decent, said it was quiet and free, just a dirt road that led to a clearing in the jungle. Nina was a bit hesitant at first, said it looked kind of sketchy, but I convinced her it would be fine. We'd been parking in remote spots for months without any issues. What's the worst that could happen, right? Famous last words. By the time we got the van situated and leveled out, the sun was already setting. That's when the jungle really comes alive. You hear all these sounds, insects and birds and God knows what else rustling in the bushes. Nina started making dinner while I set up our chairs outside, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. We had cold beer, she was cooking up some fish tacos we'd bought from a market, and the temperature had finally dropped from that oppressive daytime heat to something bearable. But then I noticed something that made me pause. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt, leading deeper into the jungle on a path we hadn't explored. They looked recent, maybe from that same day, and they were from a pretty big vehicle, definitely not another van. I didn't mention it to Nina because I didn't want to freak her out, but I made a mental note to keep our doors locked that night. Around 11, we were lying in bed watching something on Nina's laptop when we heard it, the sound of an engine in the distance. At first I thought maybe it was just someone driving on the main road, but then it got closer, and I realized it was coming from that same path I'd seen earlier. The headlights swept across our van's windows, and my heart just dropped. Nina grabbed my arm, whispered, "Who the hell is that?" And I honestly had no answer. The vehicle stopped maybe 50 yards away, and the engine cut off. For a few seconds, there was just silence, this disturbing kind of quiet where even the jungle seemed to hold its breath. Then we heard car doors opening, not one, but at least 3 or 4 of them. Men's voices, speaking in rapid Spanish, and then footsteps crunching on the gravel, getting closer to our van. I killed the laptop screen immediately, plunging us into complete darkness. Nina's breathing was so loud I was afraid whoever was out there could hear it through the van walls. The footsteps stopped right outside, and I could see shadows moving past our windows, at least 3 different shapes, maybe more. One of them said something that made the others laugh, this low, menacing kind of laugh that made every hair on my neck stand up. I reached under the bed where I kept our emergency bag, feeling around for the knife I'd packed, just a basic camping blade, but it was better than nothing. Nina squeezed my hand so hard I thought she might break my fingers. We'd been in sketchy situations before, had some drunk guys bang on our van in a Walmart parking lot once. But this felt different. This felt intentional, like they'd been waiting for us. One of them tried the door handle. Just tested it. Real casual, like he was checking if we'd been stupid enough to leave it unlocked. Thank God I'd engaged the deadbolt before we went to bed. Then a flashlight beam hit our window, moving slowly across the curtains we'd drawn for privacy. I could hear them discussing something in Spanish. My Spanish is pretty basic, mostly limited to ordering food and asking for directions, but I caught a few words that made my blood run cold. Americanos, one of them said, and then dinero, and something that sounded like van nuevo. They knew we were American, they knew the van was valuable, and they were definitely not here to welcome us to the neighborhood. Another voice, deeper and more authoritative, said something sharp and the flashlight clicked off. The footsteps moved away, back toward their vehicle, and for a second I actually thought they were leaving. But then I heard the most disturbing sound, metal scraping against metal, like they were unloading something from their truck. Nina started crying silently, tears just streaming down her face in the darkness, and I pulled her close, trying to think of what the hell we should do. Our phones had decent signal earlier, but when I checked mine now, it showed only one bar and the connection kept dropping. I tried texting Rachel back in Austin, just typing help with our location, but the message wouldn't send. It just sat there with that little spinning wheel, mocking me. The men were moving around our van now, circling it like sharks, and I could hear them talking in lower voices, more serious now. One of them kicked our tire, hard, and the whole van shook. Nina let out this tiny whimper, and I covered her mouth with my hand, not to hurt her, but to keep her quiet. The scary thing about being trapped in a van is that you're basically in a metal box with windows. There's no back door to escape through, no basement to hide in. You're just sitting there hoping that thin walls and locked doors are enough to keep the bad stuff out. I started the engine as quietly as I could, keeping the headlights off, thinking maybe we could just ram our way past their vehicle and make a run for it. But before I could put it in gear, I heard something that made me freeze. A voice, speaking in English this time, said, "We know you're awake in there." Perfect English, barely any accent at all. He walked right up to my driver's side window and tapped on it with something metal. Maybe a crowbar, maybe a gun, I couldn't tell. "You have two choices," he continued, his voice calm and almost friendly. "You can open this door and give us what we want, or we can open it ourselves. Either way, we're coming in." My mind was racing through options, and none of them were good. If I tried to drive away, they might shoot out our tires or worse. If I opened the door, we'd be completely vulnerable. If I did nothing, they'd break in anyway and probably be even more pissed off. Nina was shaking so hard the whole bed was vibrating, and I could feel my own hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The man outside knocked again, harder this time, and said, "I'm counting to 10. 1, 2. I looked at Nina in the darkness, trying to communicate something without words, some kind of plan, some kind of reassurance. But her eyes were wide with terror, and I realized she was looking past me, at the passenger window. I turned my head slowly and saw another face pressed against the glass, just inches away, grinning at us with teeth that looked almost luminous in the moonlight. I made a split-second decision that probably saved our lives, or maybe just delayed the inevitable. I can't really say which. I revved the engine loud, threw it into drive, and punched the gas pedal. The van lurched forward, and I heard someone yell in Spanish, followed by the sound of bodies diving out of the way. Our headlights came on automatically, and I saw their truck for the first time. A black Chevy Silverado with no license plates and tinted windows, parked at an angle that was blocking most of the path out. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, taking us off the dirt road and straight into the jungle, branches scraping against the van's sides like fingernails on a chalkboard. Nina screamed and grabbed the dashboard as we bounced over roots and rocks, the suspension groaning with every impact. Behind us I could hear shouting, and then the Silverado's engine roaring to life, headlights flooding the jungle behind us. The thing about driving through dense vegetation in the dark is you have absolutely no idea what's ahead of you. Could be a tree, could be a ditch, could be a cliff for all I knew. I just kept the gas pedal down and prayed we'd find another way back to the main road. The van's undercarriage was taking a beating. I heard something scrape and then a loud bang that I really hoped wasn't the oil pan rupturing. Nina was yelling directions like she could actually see anything useful, saying, "Go left." No, right? But it was all just chaos and adrenaline. The Silverado was gaining on us, those big off-road tires handling the terrain way better than our street van ever could. Then their headlights disappeared for a second, and I thought maybe we'd lost them, but Nina grabbed my arm and pointed ahead. We'd come out onto a different dirt road, wider than the first one, and I could see lights in the distance. I floored it toward those lights, hoping it was the highway or a gas station or literally anything with other people around. The van was shaking so badly, I thought the wheels might fall off, and the check engine light had come on along with about 5 other warning indicators I'd never seen before. But we were moving fast, probably 60 miles an hour on a road that barely qualified as a road, and for a minute I actually thought we might make it. Then Nina said the words I'd been dreading. "They're catching up." I checked the rearview mirror, and sure enough, the Silverado was right behind us, close enough that I could see there were at least 4 men inside. The driver flashed his high beams and laid on the horn, and one of the passengers leaned out the window with something in his hands. I couldn't tell if it was a gun or a pipe or what, but I wasn't about to find out. The lights ahead were getting closer, and I realized it wasn't the highway. It was another clearing, but this one had buildings. Small concrete structures with corrugated metal roofs, maybe worker housing or storage facilities for one of the farms in the area. No lights were on inside any of them, but there were a few other vehicles parked around, a couple of old sedans and another pickup truck. I skidded to a stop in front of the largest building, and Nina and I just looked at each other for a second, both of us thinking the same thing. Do we get out and try to find help, or stay in the van where we at least have some protection? The Silverado pulled in behind us, blocking our exit again, and the decision was basically made for us. The men got out slowly this time, not rushing, because they knew we had nowhere left to run. The one who'd spoken English before walked into our headlights, and I got my first good look at him. He was maybe in his mid-30s, wearing dark jeans and a button-up shirt that seemed way too nice for someone hunting tourists in the jungle. Clean cut, almost handsome in a scary kind of way, with slicked back hair and a gold chain around his neck. He held up his hands in this mock peaceful gesture, like he was approaching a wild animal he didn't want to spook. "You made this much harder than it needed to be," he said, and his voice was steady, almost amused. "Damaged your van pretty badly. That's going to affect its value." Behind him, the other men were spreading out, surrounding us on all sides. One of them had a machete, an actual machete, just hanging casually from his hand like it was the most normal thing in the world. Another was on his phone, talking to someone and looking at our van like he was appraising it. Nina grabbed my hand again and whispered, "What do we do?" And I realized I had absolutely no answer. We were trapped. The van was probably undrivable at this point, and we were at least 20 minutes from anything resembling civilization. The leader guy walked closer until he was right at my window, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. He tapped on the glass again with his knuckles, almost polite, and said, "Let's talk like adults." Rolled down the window. Every instinct in my body screamed not to do it, but I also knew that if I didn't, they'd just smash it anyway, and then we'd really be screwed. I cracked it open maybe 2 inches, enough to hear him clearly, but not enough for him to reach inside. He smiled at that, like he appreciated the effort even though we both knew it was pointless. "Smart," he said. "I like that. Shows you're thinking." Then his expression changed, got more serious, and he leaned in close. "Here's the situation. You're on private property, my property, and you've damaged some expensive vegetation with your little joyride through the jungle. So now you owe me." Nina made this sound in her throat, half laugh and half sob, because the absurdity of it was almost funny. We were being shaken down by some cartel guy pretending we destroyed his crops or whatever. But I could see in his eyes that he wasn't joking, and the 3 men behind him definitely weren't laughing. One of them started walking around the van, running his hand along the side panels, checking out the solar setup on the roof, looking in through the back windows at our stuff inside. "Nice conversion," the leader continued. "Probably cost you what, 40,000? 50? Americans always spend too much money making these things pretty." He pulled out a pack of cigarettes, lit one up, took a long drag. "I'll make this simple. You give me $10,000 right now, cash, and you can leave. No harm done. Or," he paused, blew smoke through the crack in my window, "or we take the van and you walk back to Tulum. Maybe you make it, maybe you don't." The jungle is very dangerous at night. I actually laughed, couldn't help it, because the whole thing was so insane. Do we look like we're carrying $10,000 in cash? I said, and immediately regretted it because his smile disappeared. He flicked his cigarette onto the ground and stepped on it, grinding it into the dirt with his boot. Then we have a problem, he said quietly. Behind him, one of the other men said something in Spanish and they all laughed, except the leader, who just kept staring at me with these dead, cold eyes. He walked back to the Silverado and opened the rear door, pulled out a red gas can, the kind you use for emergency fuel. My stomach dropped. Nina saw it too and started crying again, really crying this time, not trying to be quiet anymore. Please, she said, loud enough for them to hear. Please, we don't have that kind of money. We can give you everything we have, maybe $2,000, some camera equipment. The leader held up the gas can and unscrewed the cap, and I could smell it immediately. Gasoline, sharp and chemical and terrifying. I'm going to count to 60, he said, checking his watch like he was timing a workout. If that door isn't open and I don't see cash in my hand, I'm going to pour this all over your pretty van and light it up. With you inside or outside, I honestly don't care which. One of the other men, the one with the machete, started laughing and saying something in Spanish that made the others join in. They were enjoying this, getting off on our fear, and that's when I realized this wasn't really about money at all, or at least not just about money. This was about power, about control, about teaching some stupid American tourists a lesson they'd never forget. The leader started counting. 60, 59, 58. Nina was pulling at my arm, saying we should just give them everything and hope for the best. But I was staring at that gas can and thinking about our entire life inside this van. Not just the money we'd spent, but the 6 months of memories, Nina's camera with all her photos, my grandfather's watch I kept in the glove compartment. 45, 44, 43. I popped open the center console where we kept our emergency cash, pulled out the envelope with about $1,800 we'd been saving for emergencies. Well, this definitely qualified. I also grabbed Nina's camera bag from behind the seat and my laptop from under the bed. If we were going to get out of this alive, we'd have to give them something. I rolled down the window all the way this time and held out the cash. The leader stopped counting and walked over, took the envelope, flipped through it with his thumb like a dealer counting cards. His face showed nothing, no satisfaction, no disappointment. He just looked at the money, then at me, then at Nina. This is what, 2,000? Maybe less. He handed the envelope to one of his men and turned back to us. I said 10,000. You're short $8,000. He lifted the gas can and started unscrewing the cap again. And that's when Nina did something that probably saved us, or damned us. I still can't decide which. Nina opened her door before I could stop her, just swung it open and stepped out with her hands up like she was surrendering to the police. Wait, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I can get you the money. I can transfer it right now, electronically. I have access to our accounts. The leader tilted his head, studying her like she was some interesting specimen he'd found in the jungle. I wanted to yell at her to get back in the van, but the words stuck in my throat because part of me knew she was buying us time, maybe our only chance. He gestured to one of his men, who grabbed Nina by the arm, not roughly, but firm enough that she couldn't pull away. Show me, he said, and Nina pulled out her phone with trembling hands. I watched through the windshield as she opened our banking app, and my heart sank because I knew exactly what our balance was, $4,300. Our entire savings, everything we had left after buying and converting the van. The leader looked at her screen and actually smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse right before the killing bite. 4,000, he said. Still short. Nina was talking fast now, desperate, saying something about Venmo and PayPal and her parents in Phoenix who could wire money in the morning, but he wasn't listening anymore. He turned to his men and said something in Spanish, and two of them moved toward me. I locked my door, but it was pointless. One of them smashed the window with the machete handle and reached in to pop the lock. They dragged me out onto the dirt, and I tried to fight back, but one of them punched me in the stomach so hard I couldn't breathe. I fell to my knees, gasping, tasting dirt and blood where I'd bitten my tongue. Nina screamed and tried to run to me, but the leader caught her, wrapped his arm around her waist, and pulled her back against him. Here's what's going to happen, he said, speaking to both of us now. You're going to transfer that $4,000 to an account I'm going to give you. Then you're going to give me the van keys, the title if you have it, and anything else valuable inside. Then you're going to walk that way." He pointed toward what I assumed was the direction of the main road. "And you're not going to talk to the police, because if you do, I will find you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I will find you." One of his men had already climbed into the driver's seat of our van, was rifling through everything, tossing our clothes and supplies onto the ground like trash. He found Nina's camera equipment and let out this whistle, holding up her Nikon like it was a trophy. The leader nodded approvingly. "See? This helps. Professional camera, maybe worth $2,000. Now you're only short $4,000 instead of $6,000. Nina completed the transfer, her fingers shaking so badly she had to try 3 times to type in the password. I watched our savings disappear, just vanish into some account with a string of numbers instead of a name, and felt something break inside me. Not just fear anymore, but rage. Pure, helpless rage at these men, at myself for being so stupid to park in the middle of nowhere, at the whole goddamn situation. The leader checked his phone, confirmed the transfer went through, and then shoved Nina toward me. She collapsed against my chest, and I wrapped my arms around her, both of us just trying to stay upright. "The keys," he said, holding out his hand. I reached into my pocket and pulled them out. That little keychain Nina had bought me in Colorado with a tiny silver mountain on it. I dropped them into his palm, and he closed his fist around them. "Smart choice," he said. "Now walk. Don't look back. Don't stop until you hit the highway. And remember what I said about the police." We walked. That's the disturbing part, the part that still keeps me up at night. We just turned around and walked away from everything we owned, every plan we'd made, every dream we'd built into that van over 6 months. Behind us, I could hear them laughing, the van's engine starting up, doors slamming. Nina was sobbing openly now, and I was probably crying too, though I couldn't really tell because everything felt numb and unreal, like I was watching this happen to someone else. The dirt road stretched out ahead of us, illuminated only by moonlight, and I had no idea how far we'd have to walk or what we'd do when we got there. We'd been walking maybe 20 minutes when we heard the explosion, a deep, thunderous boom that lit up the jungle behind us orange and red. Nina and I turned around at the same time and saw flames shooting into the sky, black smoke billowing up into the stars. Our van. They'd burned it anyway, even after taking everything, because guys like that don't keep promises. They destroy things because they can, because it's fun, because people like us are nothing to them. Just another scary story they'll tell their friends over beers. We stood there watching our whole life burn, and then Nina took my hand, and we kept walking toward the lights of Tulum. 2 more tourists who'd learned the hard way that not every adventure has a happy ending. Some of them just end with you walking barefoot down a dirt road in Mexico, broke and broken, lucky to be alive, but not quite sure if lucky is the right word for what we were. My name is Sienna Marsh. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I bought my van, a white 2019 Ford Transit, about 8 months ago after my divorce was finalized. My ex-husband Kevin thought I was having some kind of midlife crisis, said I was being irresponsible, but honestly leaving that marriage was the best decision I ever made. I gutted the Transit myself, watched probably 100 YouTube videos, and built everything from scratch. It's not fancy, but it's mine. My sister Vanessa was the only one who supported the decision, even helped me install the ventilation fan on a brutally hot afternoon last June. She's 5 years younger than me, still thinks I'm cool somehow, and she's the one who suggested I take a trip down to Mexico once the van was ready. Said it would be good for me, help me find myself or whatever self-help book she'd been reading that month. I'd been planning this trip to Tulum for 3 months. Researched everything obsessively, best routes, safest border crossings, where to park, what to avoid. I'm not the spontaneous type, never have been. My ex used to say I was too rigid, too controlling, but I call it being prepared. I learned basic Spanish on Duolingo, got my van registered for Mexican insurance, even joined a couple of Facebook groups for solo female van travelers in Mexico. Everyone said Tulum was safe, that the tourist areas were perfectly fine, and that as long as you stayed visible and parked in designated spots, you'd be totally okay. The horror stories I'd read online were always about people doing something stupid, parking in sketchy places alone, flashing money around, trusting the wrong people. I wasn't going to make those mistakes. The drive down was actually amazing. I crossed at Laredo and took the coastal route through Tampico and Veracruz, stopping at these gorgeous beaches where I'd wake up to dolphins jumping in the waves. Met some other van lifers along the way, a retired couple from Oregon, a young guy from Canada traveling with his dog. Everyone was friendly, helpful, sharing tips about where to eat and what roads to avoid. By the time I got to Tulum, I felt confident, almost proud of myself for pulling this off solo. It was early September, past the main tourist season, so the town wasn't as crowded as I'd expected. I spent my first 2 days parked at a designated campsite right near the beach, paying $20 a night for a spot with other vans and RVs. It was safe, clean, had bathrooms and showers, but it also felt kind of boring, you know? Like I'd driven all this way just to park in what was basically a parking lot. On my third night, I met this woman named Lauren at a beach bar. She was American too, maybe late 20s, with bleached blonde hair and this really intense energy that I found kind of exhausting, but also intriguing. She'd been living in Tulum for 6 months, worked remotely doing social media marketing for some startup, and lived in her Sprinter van full-time. We got talking about spots to park, and she told me about this place she'd discovered, an abandoned resort property about 15 minutes outside town, right on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Said it had been shut down for years, some legal dispute between the owners, and now it was just sitting there empty. She'd been parking there regularly, said the views were incredible and it was completely free. Way better than those touristy campsites, she said, lighting up a cigarette. You actually feel like you're in Mexico, not just some sanitized version for gringos. I should have trusted my instincts. Something about Lauren felt off. She was too eager to share this information with a complete stranger, too insistent that I check it out. But I was also bored with the campsite and curious about this abandoned resort. She showed me photos on her phone and they looked stunning. Crumbling buildings covered in vines, an empty pool filled with rainwater, the ocean stretching out forever in the background. I'm heading there tonight actually, she said. You should follow me. I'll show you exactly where to park. And like an idiot, I agreed. We left the bar around 9, and I followed her white Sprinter van through the streets of Tulum and out onto a dark highway. After about 10 minutes, she turned off onto an unmarked dirt road. No signs or anything, just a gap in the jungle that I would have driven right past if I hadn't been following her taillights. The dirt road was rougher than I expected, full of potholes and loose gravel that made my van shake and rattle with every bump. Lauren's Sprinter was handling it fine, but my Transit sat lower and I kept hearing the undercarriage scrape against rocks. I almost turned back twice, but her brake lights kept appearing ahead of me in the darkness, leading me deeper into what felt like absolute nowhere. The jungle pressed in on both sides, branches scraping against my windows, and I couldn't see anything beyond the narrow tunnel of my headlights. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes, the road opened up into this massive clearing, and I got my first look at the resort. Lauren wasn't lying. It was incredible in this eerie, haunting way. 3 large buildings arranged in a U-shape around what used to be the main courtyard, all of them dark and silent, windows either broken or boarded up. Lauren parked near the largest building, and I pulled up next to her, killing my engine and just sitting there for a minute, taking it all in. The ocean was maybe 100 yards away, and I could hear waves crashing against the cliff, this constant rumbling sound that felt almost alive. She hopped out of her van immediately, all smiles and energy, waving for me to come check out the view. I grabbed my flashlight and joined her, and I have to admit, standing at the edge of that cliff looking out at the moonlight on the water was pretty breathtaking. See, she said, spreading her arms wide like she owned the place. This is what van life is supposed to be about. Not some crowded parking lot with a bunch of tourists. There were a few other vehicles scattered around the property, an old VW bus that looked like it hadn't moved in months, a pickup truck with no tires sitting on blocks, and what might have been a sedan but was so covered in vines I couldn't really tell. We walked around for a bit, exploring the abandoned buildings with our flashlights. The main lobby still had furniture in it, couches rotting with mildew, a reception desk with papers scattered everywhere, a chandelier hanging at a weird angle like it might fall at any second. Lauren was chattering away about the resort's history, Said it had been shut down after Hurricane Wilma in 2005 and the owners just abandoned it when insurance wouldn't pay out. She seemed to know a lot about the place, maybe too much, and I remember thinking it was kind of strange how comfortable she was here. Like she'd been coming here way longer than 6 months. We found the pool, and it was exactly like in her photos. Empty except for green water at the deep end and palm fronds that had fallen in. Something about it felt really disturbing, the way the moonlight reflected off that stagnant water. "So where do you usually park?" I asked, because I was starting to feel exposed out in the open courtyard. Lauren pointed to the far side of the property, near one of the smaller buildings. "Over there is good. You're hidden from the road, but still have easy access out if you need it." We walked back to our vans, and I noticed she was parked in a completely different spot than where she'd pointed, right near the entrance, closest to the exit. That should have been my second warning sign, but I was tired from the drive and honestly just wanted to get settled. I drove over to the spot she'd recommended, backed in so I was facing out like I always do, and started my usual evening routine. Locked all the doors, checked that my windows were secure, set up my little curtain system for privacy. Lauren came over and knocked on my door around 10:30, asked if I wanted to share some wine, but I was exhausted and told her maybe tomorrow night. I texted Vanessa before bed, sent her a photo of the ocean view, and told her I'd found this amazing free spot. She wrote back immediately. "Looks cool, but also kind of creepy. Be safe, sis." I assured her I was fine, that there was another van here, so I wasn't completely alone, and then I plugged my phone into the charger and settled into bed with a book. But I couldn't concentrate. Something felt off, this scary prickling sensation at the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. The sounds were different here, not just the ocean and jungle, but other noises I couldn't place. Metal creaking, maybe from the old buildings settling, or footsteps, I couldn't tell which. Around midnight, I heard voices, distant but definitely human, speaking Spanish and laughing. I peeked through my curtain and saw lights moving around the main building, flashlights or phone screens, at least 3 or 4 people. My heart started pounding because Lauren hadn't mentioned anyone else being here. I grabbed my phone to text Lauren and ask if she knew who these people were, but I had 0 signal, not even 1 bar, just that little no service message that made my stomach drop. How did I not check that before parking here? I always checked cell service. It was like rule number 1 of van camping, but I'd been so distracted by the view and following Lauren that I'd completely forgotten. The voices were getting closer now, and I could see the flashlight beams sweeping across the courtyard, heading in my general direction. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, watching through a tiny gap in my curtain. There were 4 of them, all men, walking casually like they owned the place. They stopped maybe 20 yards from my van, and one of them lit a cigarette. The orange glow illuminated his face for a second. He looked young, maybe early 20s, with a baseball cap and a tattoo snaking up his neck. They were talking about something, passing around what looked like a bottle, and I caught fragments of their conversation. My Spanish wasn't great, but I heard words like turistas and dinero, and my blood went cold. One of them pointed toward where I was parked and said something that made the others laugh. I watched as they started walking toward my van, taking their time, and I realized with horrible clarity that this wasn't random. They knew I was here. Someone had told them. I thought about Lauren immediately, how eager she'd been to bring me here, how she'd parked near the exit while directing me to this isolated corner, how she'd suggested I park specifically in this spot. Had I been set up? Was this whole thing some kind of trap? The idea seemed paranoid and crazy, but these men were definitely coming toward my van, and they definitely didn't look like they were here to welcome me to the neighborhood. I did the only thing I could think of. I crawled into the driver's seat as quietly as possible, keeping my head below window level, and felt around for my keys. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped them twice before finally getting them in the ignition. The men were maybe 10 yards away now, close enough that I could hear their footsteps crunching on gravel. One of them said something, and they all stopped, and I realized they were waiting to see if I'd noticed them. Testing me. In that moment, I made a decision. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I flipped on my headlights. The high beams caught all 4 of them directly in the face, and they threw up their hands, surprised and momentarily blinded. I didn't wait to see what they'd do next. I slammed the gas pedal, and the van lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. They scattered out of the way, and I heard someone yell, but I was already racing toward the exit, bouncing over ruts in the dirt I couldn't see. My headlights swept across Lauren's Sprinter as I passed it, and I saw her. She was standing outside her van, phone in hand, watching me leave with this expression that I'll never forget. Not surprised, not concerned, just blank. Like she'd been expecting this exact thing to happen. I wanted to stop, wanted to scream at her and demand to know what the hell was going on. But those men were already running back toward the main building, probably going for a vehicle, and I knew I had maybe 30 seconds before they came after me. The dirt road seemed twice as long driving out as it had coming in, every second expecting to see headlights behind me or hear gunshots or something worse. Branches whipped against my windows and I heard something tear, probably my awning or one of my solar panels. But I didn't care, I just needed to get back to the highway. When I finally hit pavement, I almost cried with relief. I turned toward Tulum and pushed the van as fast as it would go, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. No one was following me. Maybe they decided I wasn't worth the trouble, or maybe Lauren had called them off. I had no idea. I drove straight through Tulum without stopping. Even though it was past 1 in the morning and I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel straight. I didn't feel safe until I was back at that boring, expensive campsite near the beach, parked between a German couple's RV and a family from Texas with 3 kids. I paid for a week up front, locked every door and window, and then I just sat there in the darkness, trying to process what had almost happened. The scary part wasn't even the men or the setup. It was how close I'd come to trusting the wrong person, how easily I'd let myself be led somewhere dangerous because someone seemed friendly and the photos looked pretty. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in my van with all the lights off, watching the campsite entrance, jumping at every sound. Around 3 in the morning, I tried to convince myself I'd overreacted. Maybe those men were just local guys hanging out at a spot they'd always used. Maybe Lauren wasn't involved at all. Maybe I'd let my paranoia get the best of me. But then I remembered her face when I drove past, that blank, emotionless expression, and I knew deep down that something had been very wrong about that whole situation. When the sun finally came up, I felt exhausted but also weirdly grateful to be alive and surrounded by families making breakfast and kids riding bikes around the campsite. Normal, safe, boring things that suddenly felt incredibly precious. I spent the next 2 days barely leaving the campsite. I told myself I was just regrouping, planning my next move, but really I was scared. Scared to drive around Tulum. Scared I'd run into Lauren somewhere. Scared those men had gotten my license plate and were looking for me. It sounds dramatic now, but in the moment it felt very real and very dangerous. On the 3rd day, I finally worked up the courage to go into town for groceries. I was walking through the produce section of this little market when I saw her, Lauren, standing by the mangoes, laughing with 2 Mexican guys I'd never seen before. She looked different somehow, harder, and when she turned and saw me, her smile disappeared for just a second before snapping back into place. She waved, actually had the nerve to wave at me like we were old friends, and started walking over. Every instinct told me to run, but I was frozen, watching her approach with this sinking feeling in my stomach. "Sienna, oh my God, where did you disappear to the other night?" she said, all fake concern and wide eyes. "I woke up the next morning and your van was just gone. I was so worried something happened to you." The audacity of it made me actually angry instead of scared. I stared at her and said, "Some men showed up. 4 of them. They were walking straight toward my van." Her expression didn't change, not even a flicker. "Oh wow, that's so scary," she said, touching my arm like she cared. "Yeah, sometimes locals hang out there. That's why I always park near the entrance, you know, just in case. You should have texted me. I would have told them you were cool." I pulled my arm away from her touch. "I had no cell service. You didn't mention that part." She laughed, this light, dismissive sound. "All right, yeah, service is spotty out there. That's kind of the point though, you know? Getting away from everything." The 2 guys she'd been talking to were watching us now, and something about the way they were looking at me made my skin crawl. One of them said something to Lauren in Spanish, and she responded without taking her eyes off me. "Listen," she said, her voice dropping lower, more serious. "I don't know what you think happened, but you're being paranoid. Those guys were probably just curious about a new van. It's not like they did anything to you, right? You're fine." The way she emphasized that last word, fine, felt like a threat, or maybe a warning. Like she was reminding me that I'd gotten away and I should just be grateful and keep my mouth shut. I left my shopping cart right there in the aisle and walked out of the store. My hands were shaking again as I got back in my van, and I sat there for a minute trying to decide what to do. Should I go to the police? And tell them what exactly? That a woman I'd met in a bar had taken me to an abandoned resort where some men had walked toward my van? I hadn't been robbed, hadn't been assaulted, didn't even have proof that anything illegal had happened. They'd probably laugh at me or worse, think I was some hysterical tourist wasting their time. But I also couldn't just pretend everything was normal. Couldn't keep traveling around Tulum knowing Lauren was out there, probably doing the same thing to other solo female travelers. I thought about all those Facebook groups I'd joined, all the women asking for advice about safe places to park, and wondered how many of them had met someone like Lauren. That afternoon, I packed up everything and left the campsite. Not just the campsite. I left Tulum completely, started driving north with no real destination in mind. I just needed distance, needed to feel like I was moving away from whatever disturbing thing I'd stumbled into. I made it about an hour up the coast before I had to pull over because I was crying so hard I couldn't see the road. All the confidence I'd built up over 8 months of van life, all the pride I'd felt about doing this solo trip, it just evaporated. I felt stupid and naive and incredibly lucky, and I couldn't shake this horrible feeling that Lauren was still out there, her phone full of photos of beautiful abandoned places, waiting for the next solo traveler to trust her. I sat on the side of the highway for probably 20 minutes, watching other vehicles pass by, and every white Sprinter van that went past made my heart race. I ended up in a small town called Puerto Morelos, about 40 minutes north of Tulum. It wasn't flashy or Instagram perfect, just a quiet fishing village with a decent campsite that had security cameras and a locked gate at night. I paid for 2 weeks up front and barely left my van for the first few days. I kept thinking about Lauren, replaying every conversation we'd had, trying to figure out what I'd missed. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that this was something she did regularly. Befriend solo travelers, especially women, gain their trust, and then lead them somewhere isolated where her partners could rob them or worse. The fact that I'd escaped before anything actually happened probably annoyed her more than anything else. On my 5th day in Puerto Morelos, I was sitting at a beachside restaurant trying to force myself to eat when I overheard 2 American women at the next table talking. They were maybe in their late 20s, and one of them was showing the other photos on her phone, saying something about this amazing abandoned resort she'd heard about near Tulum. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I leaned over slightly and said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but did someone recommend that place to you?" They looked at me kind of surprised, but not unfriendly. "Yeah, this girl we met last night at a bar. Lauren something? She was super nice, said she'd been living here for months and knew all the best spots." The blood drained from my face. Same name, same story, same setup. She was still doing it. I told them everything. Every detail about what had happened to me, how I'd been led there, the men who'd shown up, Lauren's reaction when I saw her at the market. They listened with increasingly horrified expressions, and when I finished, the one with the phone said, "Oh my God, we were planning to meet her there tonight." Her friend looked like she might throw up. We sat there in stunned silence for a minute, and then I made a decision. I pulled out my own phone and opened the Facebook groups I'd joined, the ones for female van travelers in Mexico. I wrote a long, detailed post warning people about Lauren, describing her appearance, her white Sprinter van, the abandoned resort, everything. I half expected the moderators to delete it or people to accuse me of being paranoid, but within an hour I had dozens of comments. Other women sharing similar stories, saying they'd met someone matching Lauren's description, that they'd felt uncomfortable but couldn't put their finger on why. One comment in particular made my blood run cold. A woman from Canada wrote that her friend had gone to that exact resort 3 months ago after meeting Lauren. She'd been robbed at knife point, had her passport and credit card stolen, and when she went to the police, they'd basically shrugged and said tourists shouldn't park in isolated places. She'd left Mexico immediately afterward, too traumatized to even finish her trip. Another woman said she'd heard rumors that the abandoned resort was owned by someone connected to local organized crime, and that they used it as a staging area for targeting tourists. Whether that was true or just speculation, I had no idea, but it fit with everything I'd experienced. The scary thing was how organized it seemed, how many people must have been involved, and how easily they'd almost caught me in their trap. The 2 women from the restaurant thanked me probably a dozen times, said I'd potentially saved their lives, or at least save them from a horrible experience. We exchanged contact information, and they promised to spread the word to everyone they met. I felt a little better after that, like maybe something good had come from my nightmare. But that night, alone in my van in Puerto Morelos, I couldn't stop thinking about all the other travelers who might not be as lucky, who might not escape, who might trust the wrong person because they seemed friendly and had a pretty smile. I thought about Lauren, wondering if that was even her real name, wondering how she could look at herself in the mirror knowing what she was doing to people. The most disturbing part was that she probably didn't even feel guilty. To her, we were just marks, just stupid tourists with money and nice vans. And if something bad happened to us, well, that was our own fault for being naive. I left Mexico a week later, drove straight through to the border, barely stopping except for gas and bathroom breaks, and didn't relax until I was back on American soil. My van had some damage from that panicked escape through the jungle, scratched paint, a bent solar panel, a crack in the windshield, but I was alive and unhurt, and that's what mattered. I made it back to Denver in early October, and Vanessa helped me unpack and clean out the van. I didn't tell her everything that happened, just enough so she'd understand why I looked so haunted. She hugged me for a long time and said, "I'm just glad you're home." And the thing is, I am glad. But I'm also angry and sad and a little bit broken, because that trip was supposed to help me find myself after my divorce, supposed to prove I could be independent and brave. Instead, it taught me that the world has people in it who see kindness as weakness, who prey on solo travelers, especially women, and who sleep just fine at night knowing the fear and trauma they've caused. I still have my van, still park it in my driveway, but I haven't slept in it since I got back. Maybe someday I will again, but right now when I look at it, all I see is Lauren's blank face and those men walking toward me in the darkness, and I wonder how many others are out there right now, parking in some beautiful isolated spot, trusting someone they just met, having no idea what's about to happen to them. My name is Marcus Pemberton. I'm 51 years old, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I bought my van, a silver 2017 Mercedes Sprinter, 2 years ago when my tech company got acquired and I suddenly had more money than I knew what to do with. My wife Ellen thought I was going through some kind of crisis, buying a van at my age, but she understood when I explained I just needed to unplug sometimes, get away from the constant emails and Zoom calls. Our daughter Maya is 23, just graduated from college, and she'd been backpacking through Central America for 6 months. When she told me she was in Tulum and that I should come visit, bring the van, and we could explore together for a week, it seemed like perfect timing. Ellen couldn't get away from work, so it would just be me and Maya, father-daughter road trip like we used to do when she was little. I flew into Cancun with the van on a shipping container. Yeah, it cost a fortune, but I wasn't about to drive through Mexico solo at my age. Picked it up at the port, dealt with all the customs paperwork, and started the drive down to Tulum. Maya had been staying at some hostel in the center of town, making friends with other backpackers, living that young and free lifestyle I definitely didn't have at her age. We planned to meet up on a Tuesday afternoon, spend a few days exploring the ruins and cenotes, then maybe drive down the coast together. She'd been sending me photos all week, her at the beach, her swimming in crystal clear water, her with new friends at beach bars. Every photo, she looked so happy, so full of life, and I felt this overwhelming gratitude that she wanted to spend time with her old man instead of just partying with people her own age. I got to Tulum around 2 in the afternoon and texted Maya that I'd arrived. She wrote back immediately, "Dad, finally, I'm at Playa Paraíso, come meet me. Beach is amazing." She sent me a pin with her location and I plugged it into my GPS. The drive through Tulum was chaotic, narrow streets packed with tourists, guys on bikes weaving through traffic, music blasting from every open-air restaurant. It felt vibrant and alive, but also slightly overwhelming, especially after the quiet drive down the coast. I found parking near Playa Paraíso and walked down to the beach, scanning the crowds from Maya's face. The beach was beautiful, but absolutely packed with people. Families, couples, groups of young travelers all crammed onto the sand. I must have walked up and down that beach 3 times before I finally texted her, "I'm here. Where are you exactly?" She didn't respond. I waited 10 minutes, then 20, watching my phone like it might suddenly produce an answer. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I started to feel the first flutter of anxiety in my chest. Maya was usually glued to her phone, always responding within minutes. I walked the beach again, this time asking people if they'd seen an American girl, blonde hair, about 5'6", wearing a blue bikini according to the photo she'd sent me that morning. Nobody had seen her, or at least nobody admitted to it. I checked all the beach clubs and restaurants, showed her photo to bartenders and waiters, and got nothing but shrugs and lo siento. By 4 o'clock, I was genuinely worried. By 5, I was calling the hostel where she'd been staying. The guy who answered spoke decent English and said yeah, he knew Maya. She'd checked out that morning. Said she was planning to meet her dad, and then they were going to travel together. Did she say where she was going after checking out? I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. No, man. She just left with her backpack. Seemed happy though, excited to see you. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe she'd met up with friends and lost track of time. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she'd gotten the location wrong and was waiting for me somewhere else. But none of those explanations felt right. Maya was responsible, always had been, and she knew I was flying all the way from Seattle to see her. She wouldn't just disappear without explanation. I went back to my van and sat there for a minute, trying to decide what to do next. That's when I noticed something on my windshield, a small piece of paper tucked under the wiper blade, folded in half. I got out and grabbed it, unfolded it with shaking hands. Written in neat handwriting were just 6 words, "Your daughter is with us." Wait. I read those words maybe 10 times, each time hoping I'd misunderstood, that it was some kind of sick joke or mistake. But the paper was real, the handwriting was deliberate, and the message was crystal clear. Someone had taken my daughter. I looked around the parking lot frantically, searching for anyone watching me, anyone who looked suspicious, but it was just the normal chaos of tourists coming and going. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone as I tried to call Maya again. Still voicemail. I tried texting. "Maya, if you can see this, please respond. I'm scared. Please tell me you're okay." The messages showed as delivered but not read. That's when the real terror set in, this gut-wrenching fear that made it hard to breathe. Should I call the police? The American embassy? But the note said to wait. And what if calling the authorities put Maya in more danger? I got back in my van and just sat there, paralyzed with indecision. My mind kept racing through every horrible possibility. Human trafficking, ransom, cartels, all the scary stories you hear about Mexico, but convince yourself won't happen to you because you're careful, because you're smart. But Maya and I had been careful. We'd followed all the rules, stayed in tourist areas, and somehow she'd still been taken in broad daylight from a crowded beach. Or maybe not from the beach at all. Maybe she'd never even made it to the beach. Maybe someone had intercepted her after she checked out of the hostel, grabbed her somewhere between there and here. The thought made me nauseous. I looked at the note again, searching for any clue I might have missed. The paper was plain white, the kind you could buy anywhere. The handwriting gave nothing away, and there was no signature or contact information. Just wait. Wait for what? Wait how long? I waited an hour. Then 2. The sun started setting, painting the sky orange and pink, and under different circumstances it would have been beautiful. But all I could think about was Maya, where she was, if she was hurt, if she was terrified. Around 7:30, my phone finally buzzed. Not a call, but a text from an unknown number. Drive to the Koba Ruins parking lot. Come alone. Bring $50,000 cash. You have until midnight. My heart dropped into my stomach. $50,000. I didn't carry that kind of cash, obviously, but I could get it. I had my credit cards, could do cash advances, could find ATMs. But midnight was less than 5 hours away, and I had no idea if I could pull together that much money in time. I texted back immediately. I don't have that much cash on me. I need more time. Please don't hurt her. The response came back within seconds. Midnight. Not a minute later. Come alone or she dies. I started driving, heading toward the center of Tulum where I'd seen a bank earlier. My mind was operating on pure adrenaline and terror, not really thinking clearly, just focused on getting the money and getting Maya back. I found a Banamex and tried using my credit card for a cash advance. They gave me the maximum, about $800 equivalent. I went to 2 more ATMs, maxed out my daily withdrawal limits on 3 different cards, and managed to scrape together maybe $3,000. It wasn't even close to $50,000. I was standing on a street corner at 8:30 at night, holding a pathetic stack of pesos, realizing I had no way to get the amount they were demanding. That's when it hit me. This might not even be about money. This might be something worse, and the ransom demand was just a way to control me, to make me drive to some isolated location where they could take everything, including my life. But what choice did I have? They had Maya. I got back in the van and started driving toward Koba, which was about 45 minutes inland from Tulum. The roads got darker and emptier the further I went, leaving the tourist zones behind and entering genuine rural Mexico. I passed small villages with houses that had tin roofs and dirt yards, saw dogs sleeping in the middle of the road, watched my GPS count down the kilometers. Around 9:30, I got another text, change of plans. Go to kilometer marker 237 on Highway 109. Park on the side of the road. Flash your headlights 3 times. This was it, I realized. This was where whatever was going to happen would happen. I thought about calling Ellen, telling her what was happening, but what could she do from Seattle except panic? I thought about calling the police, but the text had been clear, come alone. If they saw police, they'd kill Maya. At least that's what I told myself, though part of me wondered if Maya was even still alive. If this whole thing was just an elaborate setup to rob a stupid American tourist. I found kilometer marker 237 around 10:15. It was in the middle of absolute nowhere, just highway cutting through dense jungle on both sides. No buildings, no lights, no other vehicles. I pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I flashed my headlights 3 times like they'd instructed and then waited. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of insects and my own ragged breathing. I kept checking my phone, hoping for another message, some instruction about what to do next, but nothing came. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I was starting to think maybe I had the wrong location when I saw headlights in my rearview mirror coming up fast from behind. A black SUV pulled up right behind my van, blocking me in. The headlights stayed on, blinding me when I tried to look back, and I heard doors opening. 2 men got out. I could see their silhouettes against the headlights, but couldn't make out their faces. One of them walked up to my driver's side window and tapped on it with something metal. I rolled it down slowly, my mouth so dry I could barely speak. "Where's my daughter?" I managed to croak out. The man leaned down and I finally saw his face. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing a black polo shirt, clean shaven, looked almost professional. Not what I'd expected at all. "Do you have the money?" he asked in perfect English, no accent whatsoever. I held up the pathetic stack of bills I'd managed to collect. "This is all I could get. About 3,000. But I can get more. I just need time. I need to." He cut me off with a laugh, but it wasn't a mean laugh, more like he found the whole situation amusing. 3,000, he repeated, shaking his head. "Mr. Pemberton, I think there's been a misunderstanding." He pulled out his phone, tapped something, and turned the screen toward me. It was a photo of Maya. She was sitting in what looked like a hotel room, alive and seemingly unharmed, but her eyes were red like she'd been crying. "Your daughter is fine," he said. "Scared, but fine. Now here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to get out of this van, you're going to get into our vehicle, and you're going to come with us. The van stays here. If you cooperate, you and Maya will both be released in the morning. If you don't cooperate." He didn't finish the sentence, just let it hang there in the air like a threat. Every instinct screamed at me not to get out of the van. Once I was in their vehicle, I'd have zero control, zero chance of escape. But they had Maya, and that was the only thing that mattered. "How do I know you'll let her go?" I asked, stalling for time, trying to think of any possible way out of this. "You don't," he said simply. "But you also don't have a choice. Your daughter is being held by my associates about 10 kilometers from here. You come with us, we drive there together, you see that she's safe, and then we discuss the actual price of her release. Because, Mr. Pemberton, $50,000 was just to get you here. What we really want is worth much more than that." My blood went cold. "What do you want?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. He smiled, and it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. Not cruel or sadistic, just businesslike. "We want your cooperation with a small business transaction. You're going to help us move some merchandise across the border in your van. You're a respectable-looking American businessman with the expensive vehicle and proper documentation. Perfect for our needs." I felt like I might throw up. They wanted me to smuggle drugs, or weapons, or God knows what else across the border using my van. And if I refused, they'd kill Maya, or worse. I can't, I started to say, but he held up his hand. You can, and you will. Because the alternative is that your daughter disappears. You'll never see her again, never know what happened to her. Maybe her body turns up in a few months, maybe it doesn't. Is that what you want? I was crying now, not even trying to hide it, just tears streaming down my face as I realized how completely trapped I was. Please, I begged, there has to be another way. I'll pay you whatever you want. I have money, I can wire it. Just please let her go. He sighed like I was being difficult. Mr. Pemberton, we don't want your money. We want your van and your cooperation. Now get out, or I'm making a phone call, and this conversation is over. I got out. What else could I do? The second man, who'd been standing silently by the SUV, walked over and zip-tied my hands in front of me. Not tight enough to cut off circulation, but enough that I couldn't use my hands properly. They walked me to the SUV and put me in the back seat, and then the first man got in next to me while the second man walked over to my van. What's he doing? I asked, panic rising in my throat. Driving your van to our facility. The man next to me said calmly. Can't leave it sitting on the highway, too suspicious. Don't worry, we'll take good care of it. That's a nice vehicle, probably $60,000, $70,000 worth of equipment. Be a shame if something happened to it. I watched helplessly as the other man got into my Sprinter, started it up, and drove off into the darkness. Then our driver got in, and we started moving, heading deeper into the jungle on roads I didn't recognize, taking me away from anything familiar toward whatever horrible fate they had planned. We drove for maybe 20 minutes, turning off the highway onto progressively smaller and rougher roads until we were barely on a road at all, just packed dirt with jungle pressing in from both sides. I kept trying to memorize landmarks, anything that might help me find my way back, but in the darkness, everything looked the same. The man next to me hadn't said another word since we left, just sat there scrolling through his phone like this was a completely normal evening. Finally, we pulled up to a compound, a concrete wall about 8 feet high with a metal gate that rolled open as we approached. Inside was a large warehouse-style building and a couple of smaller structures that looked like offices or living quarters. My van was already there, parked near the warehouse with the other man standing guard next to it. They pulled me out of the SUV and walked me toward one of the smaller buildings. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment, and I kept stumbling over rocks and uneven ground. The man steadied me with a grip on my arm that was almost gentle, like he was helping an elderly relative, which somehow made the whole thing more disturbing. We went through a door into a room that had clearly been set up for exactly this purpose. A metal chair bolted to the floor, a table with various items on it I didn't want to look at too closely, and fluorescent lights that made everything harsh and clinical. But what made my knees actually buckle was seeing Maya. She was sitting in another chair across the room, her hands zip-tied like mine, her face puffy from crying. When she saw me, she let out this sob and tried to stand up, but there was another man in the room who put his hand on her shoulder and pushed her back down. "Dad," she choked out, and I've never heard so much fear and relief and desperation in one word. "I'm here, baby," I said, trying to sound calm even though I was anything but. "I'm here, it's going to be okay." The man who'd brought me here, the one in the black polo who seemed to be in charge, walked over to Maya and stood behind her chair. "Now that we're all together," he said, "let me explain how this is going to work. Mr. Pemberton, your van is currently being loaded with approximately 200 kilograms of cocaine. Street value in the United States, probably $15 million. Tomorrow morning, you're going to drive that van across the border at Brownsville. You'll have proper documentation, you'll smile at the customs agent, you'll answer their questions politely. Your van is set up for camping. You're just an American tourist heading home after a vacation. Nothing suspicious about that." I stared at him in disbelief. "They'll search it. They always search vans coming from Mexico, especially Sprinters. There's no way I'll make it across." He smiled that disturbing businesslike smile again. "Actually, Mr. Pemberton, they rarely search properly converted vans driven by middle-aged white Americans. You fit a profile, wealthy, legitimate, low risk. We've done our research, and the product will be hidden in ways that won't show up on casual inspection or even drug dogs. We've invested a lot of money in the concealment system, so unless they literally tear your van apart, which they won't, you'll be fine." He walked over to the table and picked up what looked like a phone. Your daughter will remain here as insurance. Once you've successfully crossed the border and delivered the product to our contacts in Houston, she'll be released. You'll get your van back, minus the modifications we've made, and you'll both go home with a story about what a scary experience you had in Mexico." Maya was shaking her head violently, crying harder now. "Dad, no, don't do it. Just call the police, please." The man who'd been guarding her slapped her across the face. Not hard, but enough to shut her up, and I lunged forward without thinking. The zip ties caught my wrists, and I fell forward onto my knees, pain shooting through my arms. "Don't touch her," I screamed, and the man in the polo shirt sighed like I was a misbehaving child. "Mr. Pemberton, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. You do what we ask, everyone goes home safely. You refuse, or you go to the authorities, or you try anything clever, and your daughter dies. Not quickly, not cleanly, but slowly and painfully, and we'll make sure you know exactly how much she suffered. Do you understand?" I understood perfectly. They had thought of everything, planned for every possibility, and I was completely, utterly powerless. They let me sit with Maya for a few minutes, kept us in the same room, but with guards watching. She was whispering frantically, asking me what we were going to do, begging me to find a way out of this. But I had no answers. Everything I'd learned about staying safe as a traveler, all the precautions I'd taken, none of it mattered now. These people were professionals, they did this regularly, and we were just two more tourists who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe not wrong place. Maybe they'd been watching Maya for days, waiting for the perfect opportunity when her wealthy father showed up with an expensive van. The scary thing was how calculated it all felt, how little emotion anyone showed. This wasn't some violent cartel operation with guns and threats. It was a business transaction, cold and efficient, and we were just assets being used to move product. Around midnight, they separated us again, took Maya to a different building, and when she screamed for me, I heard one of the guards say something in Spanish and then silence. I was left alone in that room, still zip-tied to the chair, while they finished loading my van. I could hear them working in the warehouse, power tools and Spanish conversations and occasional laughter. At some point, I must have passed out from exhaustion and fear, because the next thing I knew, someone was shaking my shoulder, and it was morning. Light was coming through a small window high up on the wall. The man in the polo shirt was back, looking fresh and rested like he'd had a good night's sleep. "Time to go, Mr. Pemberton," he said, cutting the zip ties off my wrists. "You have a long drive ahead of you. My associate will ride with you to the border to make sure you don't do anything stupid. Once you're safely across, he'll contact us and your daughter will be released." They walked me out to the van, and I almost didn't recognize it. From the outside, it looked exactly the same, but I knew that somewhere inside, hidden in the walls or the floor or the ceiling, were 200 kilograms of cocaine that could get me locked up for the rest of my life. The associate they mentioned was already sitting in the passenger seat, a younger guy, maybe late 20s, wearing a Texas Longhorns t-shirt and jeans like he was just a buddy along for the ride. He didn't say anything, just nodded at me when I got in the driver's seat. They handed me back my phone, my wallet, all my documentation. "Drive normally," the man in the polo said through my window. "Stop for gas, stop for food, act like a tourist. You have 48 hours to make the delivery in Houston. The address is already programmed in your GPS. Any deviation from the route, any attempt to contact authorities, and we'll know immediately." I started driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The guy next to me finally spoke about 30 minutes into the drive. "Relax, man. You look like you're about to have a heart attack." His English was perfect, American accent, could have been from anywhere. "How can I relax?" I said, my voice cracking. "My daughter is back there. I'm driving across the border with enough drugs to put me away forever, and you're telling me to relax?" He shrugged. "Look, I get it. This is scary for you. But thousands of people cross that border every day, and customs barely looks at half of them. You're in a nice van. You're white. You're middle-aged. You look like every other retired dude living the van life dream. They're gonna ask you where you've been. You say Tulum. They're gonna ask if you bought anything. You say some souvenirs. They wave you through. Easy. But it wasn't easy. The entire drive north, I felt like I was going to throw up. Every time I saw a police car, every time we passed through a checkpoint, my heart rate spiked, and I was sure this was it. This was where it all ended. The guy next to me stayed calm the whole time, scrolling through his phone, occasionally giving me directions even though the GPS was working fine. We stopped for gas once, and he went inside to buy snacks while I pumped, and I thought about just driving away, leaving him there, and going straight to the nearest police station. But then I thought about Maya, about what they'd do to her, and I got back in the van and waited for him to return. He came back with 2 Cokes and a bag of chips, offered me some like we were on a road trip. "You got kids?" I asked him, desperate to find some humanity in this situation. He looked at me for a long moment. "Yeah, 2 girls, 7 and 9. Then how can you do this? How can you be part of something that's destroying families?" He took a long sip of his Coke before answering. "Because my girls need to eat, Mr. Pemberton. And this pays a hell of a lot better than anything else I'm qualified for." We reached the border around 2 in the afternoon the next day. The line of vehicles waiting to cross stretched for miles, and we sat there in stop-and-go traffic for over an hour. Every minute felt like an eternity. I kept rehearsing what I'd say to the customs agent, trying to sound natural, trying not to look like I was smuggling $15 million worth of cocaine. When we finally pulled up to the booth, the agent was a woman in her 30s, looked tired and bored. She glanced at my passport, then at my companion's. "Purpose of your trip?" she asked. "Vacation," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "Visiting my daughter in Tulum, now heading back to Seattle." She looked at the van, at all my camping equipment visible through the windows. "Anything to declare? Alcohol, tobacco, large amounts of currency?" I shook my head. "Just some souvenirs. Couple of t-shirts, some hot sauce." She nodded, barely listening, already looking past us to the next vehicle in line. "Pull over to secondary inspection," she said, and my entire world collapsed. The guy next to me didn't move, didn't react at all, but I could feel the temperature in the van drop about 20 degrees. "Secondary inspection?" I repeated stupidly. "Is there a problem?" She pointed to a parking area off to the right, where several other vehicles were being searched. "Random selection. Won't take long." I pulled over on shaking legs, parked where she'd indicated, and watched in the rearview mirror as she waved through the car behind us without a second glance. Random selection. Random. Except I didn't believe in random anymore. 2 customs agents approached the van, one on each side, and asked us to step out. They were polite, professional, explained they were just doing a routine check. They had us open all the doors, open all the storage compartments, and one of them walked around with a dog, a German shepherd that sniffed every panel, every tire, every inch of the exterior. The dog didn't alert. I watched in disbelief as it passed right by where I knew the drugs must be hidden and just kept walking, tail wagging. Whatever concealment system they'd built was apparently good enough to fool drug dogs. The agents checked our IDs again, asked a few more questions about where we'd been and what we'd done, and then 20 minutes later, 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours, they waved us through. "Have a safe trip," one of them said, handing back my passport. Just like that, I was a drug smuggler. I'd crossed an international border with enough cocaine to supply a small city, and nobody had caught me. I drove away from the border crossing in a daze, barely able to process what had just happened. The guy next to me finally smiled. "Told you," he said. "Easy." We drove straight to Houston, arrived at the delivery address around midnight, a warehouse in an industrial area that looked abandoned but clearly wasn't. Men came out and unloaded the van while I sat there, numb and exhausted. When they were finished, the guy who'd been with me got out and made a phone call. He talked for about 2 minutes, then came back and handed me my phone. "Your daughter's been released," he said. "She's at a police station in Playa del Carmen, safe and unharmed. You can call her." I dialed Maya's number with shaking hands, and when she answered, I started crying so hard I couldn't speak. "Dad?" she said, her voice small and scared. "Dad, are you okay?" I managed to tell her I was fine, that it was over, that I'd come get her as soon as I could. We talked for maybe 5 minutes before someone at the police station took the phone and asked me questions I barely heard. All I knew was Maya was alive, she was safe, and somehow we'd both survived this nightmare. They let me keep the van, cleaned out, empty of anything illegal, like nothing had ever happened. I drove back to Tulum in a fog, picked up Maya at the police station where she'd been held for observation, and we held each other in the parking lot for what felt like hours. We never reported what really happened. How could we? I'd committed a federal crime, smuggled drugs across international borders, and even if we were victims, even if we were coerced, who would believe us? The authorities would want to know why we didn't go to them immediately, why we cooperated, and we had no good answers. So we flew home to Seattle, left the van in a storage facility in Houston because I couldn't even look at it anymore, and tried to pretend the whole thing had been a normal vacation that just went a little wrong. But Maya won't talk to me about it, won't even acknowledge what happened, and Ellen knows something terrible occurred, but I can't tell her the truth. And sometimes at night I think about that man in the polo shirt, about his calm professional demeanor, and I wonder how many other families he's done this to. How many other fathers have driven across that border with drugs hidden in their vehicles, terrified and compliant, choosing their child's life over everything else. The really disturbing part is that I'd do it again. If I had to make that choice again tomorrow, I'd smuggle 1,000 kilos across that border to save Maya. And they knew that, they counted on that, because that's the thing about being a parent. There's no choice you won't make, no line you won't cross, no law you won't break if it means keeping your kid alive. And somewhere in Mexico, they're watching the next tourist family arrive, looking for the next expensive van, the next desperate father, the next easy opportunity. And there's nothing I can do to stop them. My name is Garrett Pembroke. I'm 41 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I've been doing this van life thing for about 3 years now, sold my apartment, quit my marketing job, converted a 2015 Ford Transit into a pretty decent mobile home. My girlfriend Isla joined me about 8 months ago. She's 38, used to teach high school biology in Seattle before she decided the classroom walls were suffocating her. We met at a van life meetup in Colorado, and honestly, it felt like finding someone who actually understood why I left everything behind. She's got this wild red hair and freckles everywhere, always laughing at my terrible jokes. We've been planning this Mexico trip for months, and Tulum seemed like the perfect spot. Beaches, ruins, that whole bohemian vibe everyone talks about. The drive down from the States took us 2 weeks, crossing at Laredo and winding through Mexico's highways. We'd heard all the scary stories about cartel violence and corrupt cops, but honestly, most of our interactions were pretty chill. People were friendly, the street tacos were incredible, and we felt like we were finally living. Tulum was supposed to be our reward, a month of beach camping, exploring cenotes, maybe doing some diving. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon, and the touristy areas were packed with influencers and boutique hotels charging $300 a night. That wasn't our scene. Isla found this spot on iOverlander, some app where vanlifers share camping locations. It was about 15 minutes south of the main hotel zone, down a dirt road that led to an abandoned lot near the jungle. The description said quiet, secluded, free camping, perfect for a few nights. We pulled in around sunset, and I gotta say, it looked pretty ideal at first. The lot was maybe half an acre, surrounded by thick vegetation and palm trees. There were tire marks in the sand, so clearly other vans had been here before. No facilities, but were self-contained, solar panels, water tank, the whole setup. Isla was excited, already planning our morning cenote visit. I parked facing the dirt road. Always do that for a quick exit if needed, just a habit I picked up. The jungle sound started almost immediately. Birds, insects, something that might have been howler monkeys in the distance. It was loud, way louder than I expected, but Isla said it was natural, just nature doing its thing. We cooked dinner on our portable stove, some pasta with canned sauce, nothing fancy. The mosquitoes were brutal though, even with our screens up. Around 10 p.m., we noticed we weren't alone. Another van pulled into the lot, a beat-up Volkswagen Vanwagen, probably from the 80s. A guy stepped out, maybe mid-50s, scruffy beard, wearing a tank top that had seen better days. He waved at us, friendly enough, introduced himself as Dutch. At least that's what he said to call him. Said he'd been traveling Mexico for 6 years, knew all the spots. He seemed harmless, maybe a little too chatty, telling us about cenotes we had to visit and restaurants that served authentic Mayan food. Isla was polite, but gave me that look, you know, the one that says, let's keep our distance. Dutch's van looked rough, rust around the wheel wells, curtains that were more like old blankets hanging in the windows. He mentioned he'd been camping here for a week already. Said it was his favorite spot in Tulum because nobody bothers you out here. That last part stuck with me. Nobody bothers you. At the time, I thought he meant tourists or police, but lying in bed that night, Listening to the jungle sounds get even louder, I started wondering what he really meant. Isla fell asleep pretty quick. She always does, says it's her superpower. I stayed awake, scrolling through my phone, but the signal was terrible, barely 1 bar. I could hear Dutch moving around in his van, these weird scraping sounds, like he was dragging something heavy. Then it stopped. Complete silence for maybe 10 minutes, which felt strange after all that jungle noise. Then I heard it. Footsteps outside our van, slow and deliberate, crunching on the sandy ground. They circled us once, maybe twice, then stopped right by our side door. I held my breath, waiting for a knock or something, but nothing came. Just breathing, heavy and raspy, close enough that I could hear it over Isla's soft snoring. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I'd start to drift off, I'd hear something. Branches snapping, that heavy breathing again, or maybe just my paranoid brain making things up. When morning finally came, the sun filtering through our curtains felt like a relief. Isla woke up all energized, talking about hitting this cenote called Dos Ojos before it got crowded. I didn't mention the footsteps or the breathing. Honestly, in the daylight, it seemed ridiculous, like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing or it was just Dutch checking to see if we were awake. When we stepped outside, his van was still there, curtains drawn, no signs of life. The jungle looked different in the morning, less menacing, more like a postcard. Birds were everywhere, and you could see the ocean through the trees, just a sliver of blue in the distance. We drove into town, grabbed some breakfast at this little cafe where nobody spoke English, but the coffee was amazing. Dos Ojos was everything people said it'd be. Crystal clear water, underground caves, fish swimming around like they owned the place. Isla was in heaven, taking a million photos, diving down to touch the bottom. I tried to relax, to enjoy it, but something felt off. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, or maybe it was this guy we met there, a local guide named Miguel. He asked where we were staying, and when I mentioned the dirt lot south of town, his face changed. Not scared exactly, more like concerned. He said something in Spanish to his coworker, then told us that area had bad history. I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head and said we should camp closer to town, near other tourists. Isla laughed it off, said locals always try to spook tourists. It's part of the experience. We got back to the lot around 4 p.m., and Dutch was outside his van, shirtless now, doing something with a machete. He was hacking at some branches, clearing a path toward the jungle. When he saw us, he stopped and walked over, this weird smile on his face. He asked if we'd had a good day, if we'd enjoyed the cenote. I said yeah, it was great, trying to be friendly but not too friendly. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. You two sleep okay last night? I heard someone walking around. Thought maybe it was you checking things out. I told him we'd slept fine, didn't hear anything. He nodded slowly, like he didn't quite believe me, then went back to his machete work. Isla grabbed my arm and whispered that we should maybe find a different spot tomorrow, but I didn't want to seem paranoid or rude. That evening, we decided to cook inside the van instead of outside. The mosquitoes were worse than the night before, and honestly, I just wanted to avoid another chat with Dutch. Around 8 p.m., we heard a car coming down the dirt road, headlights bouncing through the trees. It was a truck, old and loud, and it pulled into the lot maybe 30 feet from us. 3 guys got out, all in their 20s or early 30s, wearing jeans and dirty t-shirts. They didn't have camping gear, no tent or anything. They just stood by their truck, smoking cigarettes and talking in Spanish, their voices carrying across the lot. Dutch came out of his van, walked right up to them like they were old friends. They talked for a few minutes, glancing over at our van occasionally. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the vibe was all wrong. One of them laughed, this harsh sound that didn't match anything funny. After about 20 minutes, the guys got back in their truck and left, but Dutch stayed outside. He was staring at our van now, not even trying to hide it. Isla noticed too, whispered that maybe we should leave right now, drive into town and find a hotel. I agreed, started the engine as quietly as I could, but before I could put it in gear, Dutch was at my window, knocking. His face was right there, inches from the glass, that same weird smile. He said the road gets dangerous at night, that we should wait until morning. Said there were potholes that could wreck our suspension, and besides, those guys in the trucks sometimes rob tourists on the dark roads. He said all this in this calm, almost friendly voice, but his eyes looked different, empty, like he was reading from a script. I told him thanks for the warning, we'd stay put. He nodded, touched his hand to the glass where my face was, then walked back to his van. We locked every door, double-checked the windows, even wedged our little camping shovel against the side door handle as an extra precaution. Isla was shaking, not from cold but from pure fear, and I felt like the worst boyfriend in the world for bringing us here. We killed the lights inside, sat in complete darkness, just listening. The jungle sounds were back, louder than ever, but now they felt hostile, like the trees themselves were watching us. Around 10 p.m., we heard Dutch's van door open and close. Footsteps again, but this time they didn't circle us. They headed toward the jungle, where he'd been clearing that path earlier. I peeked through a tiny gap in our curtain and saw his silhouette disappearing into the trees, carrying something long, maybe that machete or a shovel. Isla grabbed my hand so tight her nails dug into my skin. He was gone for maybe an hour, and during that time, we heard the most disturbing sounds, like digging, metal hitting rocks, and once, what I swear sounded like a muffled scream, but so faint I couldn't be sure if it was real or just an animal. When Dutch came back, he was alone, but his shirt was covered in dirt and something dark that looked wet. He went straight into his van without looking our way. I wanted to start the engine right then, screw the potholes and whatever else he'd warned us about, but Isla whispered that if we tried to leave, he might do something worse. She said we should wait until he was asleep, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m., then make our escape. It sounded like a plan, so we sat there in the darkness, both of us wide awake, counting the minutes. Around midnight, that truck came back. Same 3 guys, but this time they didn't park in the lot. They stopped on the dirt road, lights off, engine idling. Dutch came out again, walked up to the truck, and they talked through the driver's window. I couldn't see much, but I heard raised voices, someone arguing. Then one of the guys got out, looked pissed off, pointing at our van and then at Dutch. The guy was tall, muscular, wearing a baseball cap backward. Dutch kept shaking his head, putting his hands up like he was trying to calm the situation down. The argument went on for maybe 5 minutes. Then suddenly the guy shoved Dutch hard, sent him stumbling backward. Dutch didn't fight back, just stood there taking it. The guys got back in their truck and drove off, tires kicking up sand and gravel. Dutch stayed outside for a long time after they left, just standing in the middle of the lot, facing our van. I could see him clearly now because the moon had come out from behind the clouds, bright and full. He wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything, just staring. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. This motionless figure in the moonlight, like a statue or something not quite human. Isla started crying quietly, asking what he wanted from us, why he wouldn't just leave us alone. I didn't have answers. I checked my phone. Still barely any signal. Not enough to call for help or even send a text. We were on our own out here, and that realization hit me like ice water. The nearest town was 15 minutes away, but in the dark, on that rutted dirt road, it might as well have been 100 miles. Finally, around 2 a.m., Dutch went back into his van. We waited another hour, listening for any movement, but everything went quiet except for the jungle. I whispered to Isla that this was our chance, and she nodded, her face pale even in the darkness. I turned the key as gently as possible, and the engine roared to life, way louder than I'd hoped. Immediately, Dutch's van door flew open, and he jumped out, running toward us. I slammed the van into drive and hit the gas, our tires spinning in the sand before catching traction. We lurched forward, and I could see Dutch in the side mirror, chasing us, his mouth open like he was yelling something. We hit the dirt road doing maybe 40, way too fast for the conditions, and I felt every pothole, every rock, the whole van shaking like it might fall apart. Isla was gripping the dashboard, telling me to go faster, and I pushed the accelerator down as far as it would go. We made it maybe 2 miles down that road before everything went to hell. The front right tire exploded. Completely blew out, and the van jerked hard to the right. I fought the steering wheel, managed to keep us from flipping, but we slammed into a ditch on the side of the road. The impact knocked my head against the window, stars exploding in my vision. Isla screamed, and when everything stopped moving, I could taste blood in my mouth. The engine had stalled out, and when I tried to restart it, nothing happened. Just clicking sounds, dead battery, or worse. We were stuck, sitting ducks in the middle of nowhere, and I knew Dutch wouldn't be far behind. Isla was already crying again, saying we needed to run, hide in the jungle, Anything but stay here. I grabbed our flashlight and hopped out to check the tire, even though I knew it was pointless. The whole thing was shredded, rubber hanging off in strips, and I could see something shiny embedded in what was left, nails, maybe a dozen of them, scattered across the road like someone had planted them there on purpose. That's when I heard the engine. Dutch's VW Van, coming down the road toward us, headlights cutting through the darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I yelled at Isla to get out, and we both ran toward the jungle, branches whipping our faces, thorns tearing at our clothes. Behind us, I heard Dutch's van stop, heard his door open, heard him calling our names like we were lost children he was trying to help. His voice was sing-songy, friendly, which made it 10 times more terrifying. We crashed through the undergrowth for maybe 10 minutes, no idea where we were going, just away from him. Isla fell twice, scraping her hands and knees, but she kept getting up, kept moving. The jungle was pitch black except for our flashlight, and every sound made us jump. Animals, wind, our own breathing. Finally, we stopped in a small clearing, both of us gasping for air. I killed the flashlight so Dutch couldn't see us, and we stood there in complete darkness, listening. At first, nothing. Then, footsteps, slow and methodical, coming through the jungle. He was tracking us, and he was good at it, barely making any noise. Isla whispered that we should split up, that maybe he could only follow one of us, but I refused. Whatever happened, we were staying together. The footsteps got closer, and then we saw it, a flashlight beam, sweeping back and forth through the trees, maybe 50 yards away. Dutch was humming something, a tune I didn't recognize, and every few seconds he'd stop and call out to us. "Garrett, Isla, I'm not gonna hurt you. Those guys, the ones in the truck, they're the dangerous ones. I was trying to protect you. Just come back to the vans, we'll figure this out." His voice was so calm, so reasonable, that for a split second I almost believed him. But then I remembered the digging sounds, the dirt on his shirt, the way he'd stared at our van for an hour. Whatever he was, Protector wasn't it. We backed away quietly, deeper into the jungle, and his light moved past us, missing us by maybe 20 feet. We thought we were safe, that he'd lost our trail. Then Isla stepped on something that crunched under her foot, loud in the silence. She looked down, and I followed her gaze with our flashlight, breaking my own rule. What we saw made both of us freeze. Bones. Human bones, scattered around the clearing, some still with dried tissue attached. A skull, cracked open, sitting against a tree root. Clothing fragments, a backpack, a camera with a smashed lens. This wasn't just one person. There were remains from multiple people, all in various stages of decomposition. The smell hit me then, sweet and rotten, and I realized we'd stumbled into a dump site. Dutch's dump site. Islam made this sound, half gasp, half sob, and that's when Dutch's flashlight swung back toward us. He'd heard her. "Found you," he said, and his voice wasn't friendly anymore. It was cold, empty, final. He started running toward us, crashing through the jungle like a bull, and we ran too. Pure adrenaline, the only thing keeping our legs moving. We ran blind, branches slashing our faces, our lungs burning, and somehow we burst out onto a different road, paved this time, with actual streetlights in the distance. Isla was limping bad, blood running down her leg from a deep gash, but she didn't stop. We could still hear Dutch behind us, closer than before, his breathing raspy and labored. A car appeared around the bend, headlights blinding us, and I jumped into the middle of the road, waving my arms like a madman. The car screeched to a halt, horn blaring, and the driver rolled down his window. An older Mexican man, his wife in the passenger seat, both looking terrified of us. I was babbling in broken Spanish and English, trying to explain, and the man kept shaking his head like he didn't understand. Then Dutch emerged from the jungle. He stopped at the tree line, just standing there, that machete hanging from his hand, covered in dirt and God knows what else. The old man saw him, and his eyes went wide. He started yelling in rapid Spanish, pointing at Dutch, and his wife was screaming, fumbling with her phone. Dutch didn't move, just stared at us with those empty eyes, and then he smiled, this sad, resigned smile, before turning and walking back into the jungle. The old man unlocked his doors and practically dragged us into the back seat. His wife was already on the phone with the police, her voice shaking as she gave them the location. We drove straight to the Tulum police station, and the whole way there, Isla clutched my hand so tight I lost feeling in my fingers. Neither of us said a word. What was there to say? The police took our statements through a translator, and I could tell they weren't surprised. Turned out, Dutch, Raoul named Raymond Kohler, was wanted in 3 countries. He'd been killing travelers for years, targeting vanlifers and backpackers, people who wouldn't be missed right away. That lot where we'd camped. It was his hunting ground. The local police had suspected something but could never prove it, never caught him in the act. Those guys in the truck were apparently low-level cartel members he'd been paying to dispose of vehicles and belongings, but they'd gotten greedy, wanted a bigger cut. We weren't his first victims that week. A German couple had gone missing 4 days earlier. The police found their bodies in that jungle clearing, along with remains from at least 6 other people, maybe more. They sent a whole team out at dawn, armed officers and forensic units. But Dutch was gone. His van was still there, but he'd vanished into the jungle like a ghost. We spent 3 days in Tulum, giving more statements, identifying items they found at the scene. A watch that matched one we'd seen Dutch wearing, our tire tracks in the sand, the nails he'd scattered on the road. The police said we were lucky, that most people who encountered Dutch didn't make it out. They found his journal in the van, pages and pages of entries describing his victims, what he'd done to them, where he'd buried the ones they hadn't found yet. The translator wouldn't read most of it to us, said it was too disturbing, but she mentioned he wrote about us specifically, said we looked promising, but ran too soon. That phrase haunted me for months afterward. Ran too soon, like we were supposed to stay and let him finish whatever he had planned. The German embassy flew in to deal with the other couple's remains, and we met their families briefly at the police station. The grief in their eyes was unbearable, knowing we'd survived while their loved ones hadn't. We left Mexico as soon as the police cleared us, driving straight back to the border without stopping except for gas. Sold the van 3 weeks later. Couldn't even look at it without seeing Dutch's face in the window, hearing his voice calling our names in that jungle. Islam moved back to Seattle, said she needed to be around family, people she trusted. We tried to make it work long distance for a while, but every conversation eventually circled back to that night, and neither of us could handle it. Last I heard, she's teaching again, got married to some accountant, has a normal life with a house and a white picket fence. I'm back in Portland, working a desk job I hate, living in an apartment that costs too much. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 a.m., thinking I hear footsteps outside my door, or that raspy breathing through the walls. The police never found Dutch. They searched for weeks, brought in dogs and helicopters, checked every tourist town from Cancun to Belize. Nothing. He's still out there somewhere, maybe in another country by now, setting up another lot, waiting for the next van to pull in at sunset. And that's what scares me most. Not what happened to us, but what's happening to someone else right now. Someone who saw a free camping spot on an app and thought they'd found paradise. My name is Vivian Cortez. I'm 52 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas. I've been traveling solo in my van for the past year and a half, ever since my divorce finalized and my kids went off to college. The van's a 2018 Ram ProMaster, nothing fancy, but I built out the interior myself, learned carpentry from YouTube videos, installed the solar panels with my own 2 hands. People think it's sad, a middle-aged woman living in a van, but honestly, it's the freest I've felt in decades. No husband telling me I'm too old for adventures. No kids needing me every second. Just me, the road, and whatever comes next. I'd been wanting to visit Tulum for years, saw all those Instagram photos of turquoise water and Mayan ruins. Figured it was time to see if the reality matched the hype. I crossed into Mexico through Brownsville in early November, took my time driving down the coast. Met some other solo female travelers along the way. We'd share camping spots, trade stories over campfires, look out for each other. There's this unspoken code among women doing van life, especially in Mexico. You watch each other's backs because you never know. Tulum was my planned destination for a 2-week stay before heading further south to Belize. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon, and the hotel zone was absolutely packed with tourists. I'm talking bumper-to-bumper traffic, people everywhere with their phones out taking selfies. That's not what I came for. I wanted the real Tulum, the quiet spots where locals go, not the Instagram version. I'd been chatting with this woman named Petra in a Facebook group, for female vanlifers in Mexico. She's 47, from Germany, been traveling solo for 3 years. She told me about this wellness retreat center about 20 minutes outside Tulum's main area, run by a woman named Consuela, who sometimes let vanlifers park on her property for a small fee. Petra said it was safe, had bathrooms and showers, and Consuela even did these traditional Mayan healing ceremonies if you were into that kind of thing. Sounded perfect to me. I'm not super into the spiritual stuff, but I figured it'd be a unique experience, and having access to real facilities would be nice after weeks of gym showers and gas station bathrooms. Petra said she'd meet me there. She was coming from Playa del Carmen and would arrive the next day. I followed the directions Petra sent me, turned off the main highway onto a narrow road that wound through thick jungle. The pavement turned to dirt after about 10 minutes, and I started second-guessing whether I'd taken a wrong turn. But then I saw the sign, Centro de Sanación Ixchel, painted on weathered wood, with an arrow pointing down an even narrower path. I followed it and came to a clearing with a main house, a few small cabanas, and a circular structure that looked like it was used for ceremonies. The place had this odd vibe. Wind chimes everywhere, crystals hanging from trees, bundles of herbs drying on lines strung between posts. A woman came out of the main house, maybe mid-60s, long gray hair in a braid, wearing a white linen dress that looked straight out of a bohemian catalog. She introduced herself as Consuela, said Petra had told her I was coming. Consuela's English was good, accent thick but understandable. She showed me where to park, a flat area near the cabanas, with electrical hookup if I needed it. She explained her rules: no loud music after 9 p.m., respectful behavior during ceremonies if any were happening, and a payment of 200 pesos per night, about $10. Seemed reasonable. She mentioned there were 2 other vans already parked on the property, a couple from Canada in a Sprinter, and a guy from California traveling solo. She said everyone kept to themselves mostly, but we were welcome to join the group dinners she hosted twice a week. I thanked her, got settled in, and noticed the sun was already setting. The jungle sound started up immediately, louder than anywhere I'd camped before. As darkness fell, I saw lights coming from the ceremony structure, heard drums and chanting. Consuela was doing one of her healing sessions. I thought about checking it out, but exhaustion won. I locked my doors and fell asleep to the rhythm of drums echoing through the trees, completely unaware that Petra would never show up the next day, and that some people who enter Centro de Sanación Ixchel don't ever leave. I woke up early, around 6 a.m., to the sound of roosters and someone chopping wood. Through my window, I could see the Canadian couple. They looked to be in their early 30s, fit and outdoorsy, doing yoga on mats outside their Sprinter. They waved when they saw me, friendly enough, and I waved back. I made coffee on my little stove and checked my phone. Still no message from Petra saying she'd arrived. I sent her a text asking for an ETA, but it showed as undelivered. Signal out here was terrible, barely 1 bar. I figured she'd show up eventually, so I decided to explore the property while I waited. The main house had a small kitchen area where Consuela was preparing something that smelled like cinnamon and copal. She offered me breakfast, fresh fruit, eggs, homemade tortillas, and I accepted because it looked incredible and I was starving. While we ate, Consuela told me about the property. She'd bought it 15 years ago after leaving a bad marriage in Mexico City, wanted to create a space for healing and spiritual growth. She studied with Mayan elders, learned the old ceremonies, the traditional medicines. Most of her clients were wealthy tourists from the States or Europe, people dealing with trauma or searching for meaning. She said the land itself was special, built over an ancient Mayan sacred site. There were cenotes on the property, underground caves that the Maya believed were portals to the underworld. She'd blocked most of them off for safety, but one was still accessible if I wanted to swim. The way she talked about it all was intense, like she really believed this place had power, that spirits moved through the jungle, that the ceremonies could change people's lives. I smiled and nodded, thinking it was just sales pitch for her wellness business. The Canadian couple joined us for breakfast. Their names were Cole and Sienna, both 33, from Vancouver. They'd been at the property for 5 days already, participating in Consuela's ceremonies every night. Cole did most of the talking, telling me how transformative the experience had been, how Consuela had helped them connect with their true selves. Sienna just smiled and agreed with everything he said, but her eyes looked strange, glazed over, like she wasn't fully present. I asked what the ceremonies involved, and Cole explained it was a mix of Mayan rituals, breath work, sometimes plant medicine like psilocybin mushrooms or tobacco. He said last night's ceremony had been particularly powerful, that he'd seen visions of his past lives. I'm pretty open-minded, but something about the way he described it made me uncomfortable. He sounded less like someone who'd had a spiritual experience and more like someone who'd joined a cult. After breakfast, I went looking for the solo guy from California, figured I'd introduce myself. I found his van, a white Ford Transit, California plates, covered in stickers from national parks, but he wasn't around. The van was locked up tight, curtains drawn. I knocked, no answer. Consuela said his name was Marcus, that he was 38 and going through a difficult divorce, had been staying here for almost 3 weeks. She said he was probably down at the cenote, liked to spend his mornings there meditating. I decided to check my phone again, see if Petra had messaged. Still nothing. I tried calling her, but the call wouldn't connect. That nagging feeling in my gut was getting stronger, the one that tells you something's wrong even when you can't pinpoint what. I'd learned to trust that feeling over the years. It had kept me safe more times than I could count. Around noon, I decided to walk down to the cenote. Maybe I'd find Marcus there, or at least get a swim in and clear my head. Consuela gave me directions. Follow the path behind the ceremony structure, about a 10-minute walk through the jungle. The path was well maintained, lined with white stones that almost glowed in the shadows. I could hear water before I saw it, this echoing sound like dripping in a cave. Then the jungle opened up, and there it was, a massive sinkhole, maybe 40 feet across, water so clear I could see straight to the bottom. It was beautiful, the kind of place that takes your breath away. But Marcus wasn't there. Nobody was. Just me and the cenote and the sound of my own breathing. I was about to turn back when I noticed something floating near the edge of the water, caught on a root. I walked closer, squinting in the dappled sunlight. It was a phone in a waterproof case, and when I fished it out and looked at the lock screen, my blood went cold. The wallpaper was a photo of a woman with short blonde hair, smiling at the camera. I recognized her immediately from her Facebook profile pictures. It was Petra's phone. I stood there holding Petra's phone, my hands shaking, trying to make sense of it. Why would her phone be in the cenote? Where was she? I pressed the power button, still had battery, but it was locked, needed her passcode. I shoved it in my pocket and practically ran back up the path, my heart hammering in my chest. When I got to the main clearing, Consuela was there with Cole and Sienna, the three of them arranging cushions inside the ceremony structure. I walked straight up to Consuela, pulled out the phone, and asked if she'd seen a blonde woman, German accent, maybe arrived last night or this morning. Consuela's face didn't change, just looked at me with this calm, almost pitying expression. She said no one else had arrived, that I must be mistaken. I showed her the phone, said my friend was supposed to be here, and this was hers. Consuela took the phone from my hands, turned it over slowly, examining it like it was some artifact she'd never seen before. Then she handed it back and said sometimes tourists swim in the cenote without permission, that maybe my friend had dropped it weeks ago and I was just finding it now. But I knew that wasn't true. The phone was still charged, still working, couldn't have been in the water for more than a day at most. I told her I was going to the police, that something was wrong. Cole stepped forward then, put his hand on my shoulder in this condescending way, said I was probably just anxious from traveling alone, that Tulum had that effect on people sometimes. He suggested I join tonight's ceremony, said it would help me find clarity. I yanked my shoulder away from him, told him not to touch me, and headed back to my van. I locked myself inside and tried to think clearly. Petra's phone in the cenote, Consuela lying about seeing her, Cole and Sienna acting like zombies, Marcus nowhere to be found. Everything about this place felt wrong, like I'd walked into something that looked peaceful on the surface but was rotten underneath. I tried to start my van, thinking I'd drive into town and find the police, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Dead battery, which made no sense because I'd been running my solar panels. Everything was fully charged yesterday. I popped the hood and immediately saw the problem. Someone had disconnected my battery terminals. Not loose, not corroded, deliberately removed. I reconnected them with shaking hands, but when I tried the engine again, nothing. They'd done something else, sabotaged it in a way I couldn't figure out on my own. Panic was setting in now, real fear crawling up my spine. I was trapped here, no working vehicle, barely any phone signal, and the only people around were acting like members of some weird cult. I decided to walk out to the main road, hitchhike if I had to, get to town, and bring back help. I grabbed my backpack, threw in some water, Petra's phone, my wallet, and started walking down the dirt driveway. I'd made it maybe 200 yards when Marcus appeared on the path ahead of me. He looked rough, unshaven, skinny, wearing clothes that were dirty and wrinkled. His eyes had that same glazed look as Sienna's. He stood in the middle of the path, blocking my way, and said I shouldn't leave, that Consuela had prepared something special for tonight's ceremony, that I was invited, that I needed to stay. His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading lines someone had fed him. I told him to get out of my way, that I was leaving and he couldn't stop me. He didn't move, just stood there, swaying slightly, and repeated that I needed to stay for the ceremony. I tried to walk around him, but he grabbed my arm, not aggressive exactly, but firm, his fingers digging into my skin. I yanked free and shoved him hard. He stumbled backward but didn't fall, and that's when I saw them, Cole and Sienna, coming down the path behind me, cutting off my retreat. They weren't running, just walking with this slow, purposeful stride, like they had all the time in the world. Sienna was carrying something, and as they got closer, I realized it was rope. My stomach dropped. I looked at Marcus, then back at the couple, calculating my options. The jungle was thick on both sides of the path, but I'd grown up hiking in Texas, knew how to move through rough terrain. Without another thought, I bolted into the trees, branches whipping my face, thorns tearing at my clothes. Behind me, I heard them crashing through the undergrowth, heard Marcus calling my name in that dead voice, heard Consuela's voice too now, somewhere in the distance, chanting something in a language I didn't recognize. I ran until my lungs were on fire, no idea what direction I was going, just away from them. The jungle was thicker than I expected, vines catching my feet, roots trying to trip me every few steps. I could still hear them behind me, but the sounds were getting fainter. Maybe I was faster, or maybe they knew something I didn't, that there was nowhere to run to out here. I stopped behind a massive ceiba tree, trying to catch my breath and listen. The chanting was louder now, echoing through the jungle like it was coming from everywhere at once. Consuela's voice, deep and rhythmic, saying words that sounded ancient and wrong. Then I heard other voices joining in. Cole, Sienna, Marcus, all chanting in unison. It was the most disturbing thing I'd ever heard, like a choir performing a ritual meant to summon something dark. I pulled out my phone, one bar of signal flickering in and out. I tried to dial the police, but the call dropped immediately. Tried again, same result. I opened my messages, typed out a frantic text to my daughter back in Austin. In trouble. Tulum. Centro Destination Actual. Send help. Hit send and prayed it would go through before the signal died completely. The phone showed the little spinning wheel, trying to send, and then the signal vanished. I didn't know if the message made it out or not. I was about to try again when I heard footsteps. Close, too close. I held my breath and peeked around the tree. Marcus was standing maybe 20 feet away, his head cocked to the side like he was listening for me. His eyes scanned the jungle, empty and searching, and I pressed myself flatter against the bark, praying he wouldn't see me. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, then turned and walked in a different direction, still calling my name in that monotone voice. Once he was out of sight, I started moving again, slower this time, trying to be quiet. I had no idea where I was going, but I figured if I kept heading in one direction, I'd eventually hit the road or find another property. The sun was starting to set, orange light filtering through the canopy, and I knew I was running out of time. Night in the jungle was dangerous. I could fall into a cenote, get bitten by a snake, or worse, lose my sense of direction completely. I climbed a small hill, hoping to get my bearings, and that's when I saw it through the trees, the ceremony structure, its roof visible above the vegetation. I'd been running in a circle. I was right back where I started, maybe 100 yards from the clearing. From my position on the hill, I could see everything. Consuela was in the center of the structure, surrounded by candles, still chanting. Cole, Sienna, and Marcus were sitting cross-legged in a circle around her, rocking back and forth. And there were others, for more people I hadn't seen before, all in the same trance-like state. Some of them looked like they'd been there for weeks, their clothes filthy, their bodies thin. Consuela was holding something up to the candlelight, a clay cup filled with dark liquid, and one by one, the people in the circle drank from it. After they drank, their rocking became more violent, and some of them started convulsing. This wasn't a healing ceremony. This was something else entirely, something that made my skin crawl. I watched as Consuela moved to the edge of the circle and dragged someone forward, a woman, blonde hair matted and dirty, barely conscious. My heart stopped. It was Petra. She was alive, but just barely. Her eyes were half closed, her body limp as Consuela positioned her in front of the group. Consuela began chanting louder, and the others joined in, their voices rising to a fever pitch. I couldn't just hide and watch this happen. I had to do something, but what? I was one woman against at least 7 people, and I had no weapons, no plan, no backup. Then I remembered Petra's phone in my pocket. I pulled it out, held down the power button and volume button simultaneously, the emergency SOS feature. The phone started counting down from 3, and I prayed it would connect to whatever minimal signal existed out here. It reached 0 and started an automated call to emergency services. A recorded voice came through the speaker, asking for my emergency in Spanish. I whispered my location, said people were being held against their will, that I needed police immediately. The line crackled, and I couldn't tell if anyone had heard me, but I left the line open, hoping it would ping a cell tower and give authorities something to trace. I couldn't wait for help that might never come. Petra was down there, and whatever Consuela was planning, it was happening now. I scanned the area, looking for anything I could use, and spotted a pile of rocks near the base of the hill. I stuffed a few in my pockets, grabbed a heavy branch that felt solid enough to swing, and started making my way down as quietly as possible. My plan was simple and stupid. Create a distraction, get Petra out, run like hell. The chanting was so loud now they wouldn't hear me approaching. I got within 30 feet of the structure, staying in the shadows, and that's when I saw what Consuela was really doing. She had a knife, ceremonial looking with symbols carved into the blade, and she was holding it over Petra's chest. This wasn't about healing or spirituality. This was a sacrifice. I didn't think, just reacted. Threw the first rock as hard as I could, hit one of the candles, and sent it flying. The chanting stopped immediately. Everyone's heads whipped toward the darkness where I was hiding. I threw another rock, this one hitting Cole in the shoulder. He yelped, and that broke whatever trance they were in. Chaos erupted. Consuela started screaming orders in Spanish, and the group scattered, some running toward me, others just running. I charged into the structure, swinging the branch at anyone who got close. Caught Sienna across the arm, heard her cry out. Marcus lunged at me, but I dodged and brought the branch down on his back. He went down hard. I grabbed Petra under the arms and started dragging her toward the jungle. She was dead weight, mumbling incoherently, whatever drug they'd given her still in her system. Consuela came at me then, knife raised, her face twisted with rage. She was screaming that I'd ruined everything, that the spirits demanded a sacrifice, that I'd brought a curse upon us all. She slashed at me, and I felt the blade slice across my forearm, hot pain radiating up to my shoulder. I swung the branch with my good arm, connected with her wrist, and the knife went flying into the darkness. She stumbled back, clutching her wrist, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Then I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, sirens getting closer. My emergency call must have gone through. Consuela heard them too, and her expression changed from rage to fear. She turned and ran into the jungle, disappearing into the trees like a shadow. Cole and the others followed her, abandoning the ceremony, abandoning everything. I collapsed next to Petra, both of us bleeding and broken, and just waited. The sirens got louder, and soon the property was flooded with lights, police trucks, an ambulance, officers with guns drawn. They found us in the ceremony structure, surrounded by candles, and that clay cup still half full of whatever poison Consuela had been feeding her victims. The paramedics got Petra on a stretcher first, started in 4, checked her vitals. She was alive, but they said she'd been drugged heavily, probably for days. They bandaged my arm, said I'd need stitches, and helped me to the ambulance. As they loaded us in, I saw officers searching the property, finding the other vans, the people who'd been trapped here, some for weeks or months. They found bodies too, down in one of the sealed cenotes. 3 of them, tourists who'd checked into Centro Destination Ixchel and never checked out. The investigation took months. Consuela was never found. She knew the jungle too well, had escape routes planned, maybe connections with locals who hid her. Cole and Sienna were arrested trying to cross into Belize, completely incoherent, still under the influence of whatever combination of drugs and psychological manipulation Consuela had used. Marcus was found 2 days later, wandering the highway, dehydrated and confused. The authorities discovered Consuela had been running this operation for at least 5 years, targeting vulnerable travelers, people going through divorces or life crises, people who wouldn't be missed immediately. She perfected a system, gained their trust, isolate them, drug them, and slowly break down their sense of self until they'd do anything she asked. Some were used for labor, some for money, and some, like Petra almost was, for her twisted rituals. The Mexican government shut down the property, but rumors persisted that Consuela had started up somewhere else, maybe in Guatemala or Belize, preying on the next wave of seekers looking for healing in all the wrong places. Petra recovered physically, but never mentally. She sold her van, moved back to Germany, and I heard through the Facebook group that she never talks about what happened during those days she was held captive. As for me, I drove straight back to Austin the day they released me from the hospital, sold my van the same week, and haven't left Texas since. My daughter keeps asking when I'm going to travel again, says I shouldn't let one bad experience ruin my dreams. But she doesn't understand. Some experiences don't just ruin your dreams. They wake you up to the nightmare that's always been hiding just beneath the surface, waiting for you to let your guard down long enough to pull you under.